I am a death witch as much as I am anything. And if my idols are any indication, I think one has to be when one is forced to cope with a multitude of friends dying young and tragic. I've lost friends at a rate faster than I could process. We barely have time to react in this world, let alone rehearse, as a wise woman once put it. Funerals are a luxury, especially nowadays. As a kid, I was always dragged along to every stage of the Irish Catholic funerary process for every single second cousin and great aunt I'd never even met. But of the friends I've lost in adulthood thus far, I haven't been invited to a single proper funeral. Maybe when we're older, and what's left of our friend group has had time to grow into our adulthood, then perhaps we'll have some say in who comes to our funerals. That is, if we live long enough to get used to being adults. I'm trying to be optimistic. The closest thing to an official funeral that I got to be part of was a beautiful memorial for my friend Eric, in which some of his friends put on a production of his play, Where Does Superman Find a Therapist? The rest of his loved ones were invited to attend and share whatever they wanted. Many friends wrote poems and sang songs, and I, unable to cope, just blubbered about the fact that he was so good to me, and how much I cherished his friendship, and how the world already felt like a much darker place without his presence. I guess I've been trying to figure out the right art to make ever since. As I said, Eric was a playwright, but I knew him first and foremost as an actor. In fact, the first time I met him, he terrified me. I was early to rehearsal at our college's black box while he lingered on after his. This stranger climbed up rows and rows of empty seats to where I had perched and asked if I minded him running through his monologue. I said, "Of course not, go right ahead," eager to eavesdrop and get a free show. Before I could take the script I'd planned to scan through out of my backpack, he turned around. "Hey, if you're not too busy, could I borrow you for this scene?" I said sure, and excitedly met the stranger in the middle of the seat. He had me sit in a chair dead center, facing out on a non-existent audience. I recall him beginning the monologue slowly, pacing back and forth, speaking pragmatically with a southern drawl. Before I knew it, he catapulted into a frenzied, feverish patter about altitude sickness and eldritch eyes. He was screeching and howling, tearing at his face not an inch away from mine, circling me like a buzzard laying claim to a carcass. Just as my sympathetic nervous system decided this interaction was cause for concern, he dropped the accent and thanked me for being such a gracious scene partner. It wasn't until I saw him again in my Shakespeare class that I realized this person was the furthest thing from a threat and just a ridiculously brilliant actor. It wasn't long before I found myself debating with him over which versions of Hamlet were the most valid, and fan-querying with him over Ian McKellen in lieu of studying. Aside from that somewhat traumatizing immersive workshop of Icarus's mother, I didn't actually get to see Eric act often, and if that doesn't prove that casting isn't a meritocracy, I don't know what would. Nonetheless, I've become more aware of his repertoire posthumously, which, relevant to me, includes Orpheus and Sarah Rule's Eurydice. Tuck that in your brain pockets, it'll make sense later. Like most artists, Eric drank more than I do, but that's a low bar to clear given that my body is almost always a dry canvas. The only real exceptions are on certain loved ones' death days. It's an easy built-in ritual that serves the functional purpose of dulling the blade of loss by dulling my brain a bit. On Sebastian's death day, I drink Irish coffee, since in Belfast, the eggnog lattes Starbucks served are spiked. On Emma's death day, I have American eggnog lattes, since she was never old enough to legally drink. And on Eric's death day, I acquire the cheapest red wine I can find, and pair it well with diner food, since at every greasy spoon we'd eat post-Mattachine meals at, he'd always order red wine with his breakfast food. Wine with din-din, as a wise man once put it. When I drink mine every September 18th, I always leave about an inch at the bottom of my cup. Leftover wine like the Melanie Safka song. That was a mourning song to me long before Eric died. In fact, I remember telling him about Mixed Viv's version, between sips of Cabernet Sauvignon and bites of waffle at the Waverly Diner. Eric and I bonded over our dead friends, which only makes it all the sadder that he's now one of mine. So now, I try and try again to get it right, to figure out what performance would be worthy enough to retcon into my time slot, which I filled instead with weeping and aphorisms. This is what I've got.